very warm welcome to all our panelists today for today's panel, which is titled Pandemic and Elections, Digital and Logistical Challenges for Elections During COVID-19. We have a very distinguished speaker lineup to speak on this most important topic, and it's my task to introduce them briefly. Which is a hard thing to do, given sort of how very distinguished our panel is. So we're joined today by Professor Todd Landman, who is Professor of Political Science at the University of Nottingham. Professor Landman is also the Pro-Vice Chancellor of the University of Nottingham and the Executive Director of the Rights Lab, which is a center carrying out research on ending modern. Professor Landman leads the Faculty of Social Sciences across the university's many schools, and he has sort of wide-ranging international consultancy experience with many global organizations. He has also worked closely with the UK government on this question of ending modern forms of slavery. His publications and his authored books are numerous, so I'm just going to mention a few. I believe he's most recently author of Human Rights and Democracy, The Precarious Triumph of Ideals, and Protecting Human Rights, Studying Human Rights, and Issues and Methods in Comparative Politics. So a very warm welcome to you, Professor Landman.
Thank you very much.
We're also thrilled to be joined today by Mr. S.Y. Qureshi, who is a very distinguished civil servant and has had the distinction of serving as Chief Election Commissioner under the from 2010 to 2012, I believe, sir, under the Manmohan Singh government. Undoubtedly, his experience at the front lines of this cornerstone of democratic process will be invaluable for us to learn from. He is author of An Undocumented Wonder, The Making of the Great Indian Elections, as well as a book on the heritage and traditions of Old Delhi. Professor Qureshi now pursues his academic interests by teaching and mentoring at the Cluster Innovation Center at the University of Delhi. He is also a distinguished member of the International Elections Advisory Council. Welcome, Professor Qureshi. We are also honored to be joined today by Professor Farhat Basir Khan, who is one of the senior most faculty members at the Abul Kalam AJK Mass Communication Research Center at the Jamia Millia Islamia in Delhi. He has served as the Maulana Abul Kalam Azad Chair for over half a decade at the MRC Mass Communication Center at Jamia and as Professor of Media and Communication. Professor Basir many hats. He is a practitioner, a distinguished photographer, a teacher, a pedagogue, a researcher, and an activist. And his contributions in all these fields have been widely recognized. He has designed many productions nationally and internationally. He's led research and advocacy campaigns on a range of issues, from accessible solutions in healthcare to the rights of minority women, to building sensitivities around mental health, and also in training youth in democratic participation. Professor Basir is also, he has many affiliations and appointments, but I thought I'd mention this one in particular, which is that he's on the board of editors of the Journal of Scientific Temper at CSIR, sorry. Welcome, Professor Basir.
Thank you.
And finally, we're joined by Professor Leticia Cesarino, who is Associate Professor of Anthropology at the Federal University of Santa Catarina. Is that right, Professor Cesarino? Did I get that right? In Brazil.
Yes.
Great. And her research interests are around cybernetics and systems approaches, studying the co-emergence of social media, populist politics, post-truth, and the neoliberal episteme in the Brazilian context. So undoubtedly, we have much to learn from her as well. And two of her most recently published articles. One is what the Brazil 2018 elections tell us about post-truth in the neoliberal digital era. That's a cultural anthropology hotspot piece. And one on digital populism in Brazil for the Journal of Political and Legal Anthropology Research Review. So that's our panel for this evening. Thank you all for joining us. We're very glad to have you here. Just a brief word about the School of Arts and Sciences at Ahmedabad University and this seminar series. The School of Arts and Sciences is a sort of center for emerging center for liberal education. We prioritize a collaborative and interdisciplinary and very experience-centered learning experience, both at the undergraduate level and at the graduate level. One of the most exciting things about the School of Arts and Sciences has in fact been this seminar series, which stays true to this interdisciplinary character of the school. The seminar series has now been going on successfully for the last 2 years. And now, right now, Sarthak is helming it. And while the pandemic has posed many restrictions, one of the opportunities it's also allowed for is to bring speakers and distinguished scholars from different parts of the world to our audiences here at Ahmedabad University. Frequently, sometimes our seminars are very, very discipline specific and of niche interest to a particular discipline. At other times, they speak to very crucial in issues of wider socio-political interest. And this is definitely one of those seminars. So we extend a very warm welcome to all our speakers for today. I will hand over now to Professor French, the Dean of the School of Arts and Sciences, and then Sarthak will introduce the topic for today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maya, for the introductions, and to Sarthak for conceiving and pulling together this fascinating event. I also really want to reiterate the strength of our welcome to the visitors who have joined us. I think it's really wonderful to know that we have got speakers coming from such different settings. Leticia Cesarino coming from Santa Catarina in Brazil. There are so many interesting parallels between, let's say, different letters within BRICS. Not that BRICS is often used very much as an acronym these days, but I think the sort of comparative potential of looking at India and looking at Brazil is something that we should maybe try and do more often. Again, with Farhad Basir Khan, thank you so much for joining us from Jamia. S.Y. Qureshi, I know how difficult the job of being Chief Election Commissioner of India is, and you did it really in an exemplary way and have an extraordinary reputation from the time that you were in that office. And again, for Todd Landman, as well as being a professor in political science in Nottingham University in the UK, you're also Pro-Vice Chancellor. And for some mysterious reason, since the pandemic, the amount of administrative work in universities seems to multiply. So it sometimes lasts more than 24 hours a day. So we very much appreciate you joining us. I think this subject of pandemic and elections and how they collide and coincide, what the challenges are in running elections at the time of a mass infection around pandemics is an extraordinarily interesting subject. I mean, it's perhaps most spectacular this week in terms of what's playing out in the US and in the White House, but it's in fact something that affects multiple elections in multiple countries. So this seminar, I think we have about 50, 60 participants. It will also have a continuation, a sort of afterlife on our YouTube channel. there's a lot of curiosity, I think, from other universities around the world about these collaborative global events. So thank you all very much. And I will now hand over to Sarthak Bagchi to begin the seminar.
Right. Thank you so much, Patrick, and thank you, Maya. Once again, thanks to all the panelists who have very kindly agreed to give their time and join this discussion and make it more enriching with their expert insights. The idea of pandemic and elections is actually something which is which occurred to me as somebody who studies election campaigns very naturally when in this like due to the pandemic, my only preoccupation got a big hindrance because of the severe restrictions of on public safety, on travel, and on the lockdown and everything. And this actually puzzled me that are the kind of hindrances that researchers facing, are these the kind of hindrances that are also faced by politicians or the voters? Because we also know that elections are one time in a democratic exercise wherein politicians and voters get to interact very closely. And from my fieldwork in Bihar and Maharashtra, many times voters have reiterated the fact that elections are the only time in 5 years when they get to see their representatives and their representatives come to them. So the negotiation actually happens more from the bargaining point, increases, the leverage of the voters increases during that time of the election campaign period. However, the pandemic has seen elections across the world getting suffered or getting somewhat affected. Let's say some scholars call it democracy being delayed. Like in The Economist, they have made a chart and they have shown how democracy is getting delayed. In other places, actually, many scholars are saying democracy is getting disrupted because in the beginning of the pandemic, we saw some referendums being carried out, and those referendums are being used to give extraordinary power to the rulers, to the strongmen. Like in Hungary, it was done, and recently in Russia also we saw that kind of an example. But apart from that, what happens and how does how do elections get affected in the pandemic setting, or in the settings that are considered to be the new normal now because of let's say the restrictions, because of the virtual rallies, or because of the digital campaigning. These are the buzzwords that we are now seeing. And I think before we begin, just to lay out the context of what exactly probably I can be seeing from the field in Bihar, I would like to share some images from the field that I have managed to get access to through through digital ethnography, or something that I have been recently shifting towards. So I would like to share that, and probably to give you a glimpse of what exactly I'm talking about. Can you see my screen? This you can see that we are having this panel also in the context of one of the major provincial elections that are happening in India, in Bihar. And again, of course, in India, the scale of democracy, everything is huge, right? So Bihar goes to polls with more than 70 million voters on the electoral rolls. And this is going to be one of the major provincial democratic exercises undertaken during the pandemic, because it is happening also 5 days before the before the US polling happens on 3rd November. So the Election Commission was also right in saying that this is the largest democratic exercise being undertaken during the pandemic. And one of the main things has been the use of technology, or use of these kind of digital mediums. So we see here is an example of a digital campaigning happening in a village. Or if we see in this image, probably this is also something that we see. The speaker is on the laptop, and they're addressing the crowd through a digital medium. And this is how in the villages people are actually getting used to the digital campaign, or the virtual campaign, or virtual election rallies. And we have seen that different parties, from the Bharatiya Janata Party to the other regional parties, also are using these kind of new techniques of virtual campaigning very effectively. But of course, there is a kind of a resource disadvantage that a national party with solid mobilization abilities in WhatsApp and Twitter and Instagram presence and other things, Facebook presence and other things are giving them that kind of an opportunity, whereas regional parties are saying that probably they are not so evenly matched with their national counterparts. But on a whole, I just wanted to give this kind of gives a very nice glimpse of what exactly are we seeing on the ground in terms of the digital campaign or the virtual campaign. But from a safety point of view, again, this becomes a very important kind of a worry, because many places in the Western place in Europe, actually, we have seen that many subnational level elections have happened, and even in South Korea, the parliamentary elections could happen, or even closer homes, Sri Lanka. Uh, has had a very successfully managed election during the COVID time. However, it is very important to also understand and emphasize on the idea of public safety and following the guidelines. So the question also remains that how effectively can following the guidelines and following the safety measures can be checked and can be monitored by the election commission. And of course, we have with us the former chief election commissioner, so who can also elaborate on that. But this is again an example from a campaign of a probable candidate, right? And in India, we know that election campaign has many stages. So one stage is before the nomination is filed or tickets are distributed, and in that, basically, the idea of the campaign is to be seen and to be to be stuttering around the constituency with your followers. And in that, people who are also following around the candidate, they will never be wearing the mask, because there is a need to be seen to be doing these works. Or doing politics is also about seeing to be done. Doing politics is equally important. So the visibility factor is very much there, and the visibility factor being strong, emphasis of the idea of election campaigns and reaching out to the public, people are actually very wary of wearing masks. And again, this is not even like the debate which we are seeing, or the polarizing debate which we are seeing in the US of wearing mask or not, but this is actually wearing mask and not wearing mask just because the idea is to be seen in a campaign, and you cannot afford to be cannot afford to invisibilize yourself in an election campaign. So these are very important questions that that are also to be questions that that can be raised about the guidelines, and how feasible are these guidelines, and how much can actually be monitored by the agencies that are conducting the elections. So by and large, we see that, and of course, this also brings into picture the kind of WhatsApp targeting and the kind of WhatsApp messaging, and on Twitter storm, Twitter trends, and even Facebook messaging that is also being used by all the parties. And while we can say that there is also a sense of anonymity which has democratized a sense of participation in the election campaign. And recently we saw that in India, the dislike revolution, so to say, is also in very small manner it is also underway. And a lot of the political campaigning that I have been observing on Facebook, I have actually seen that many young people are also hitting the dislike button and commenting. They're actually going out and expressing their dislike for the political leader through these kind of garb of anonymity, or the kind of facelessness that is provided by this kind of a virtual medium. So the things are, I think, what the context I wanted to lay before this panel was, there is a lot to be explained, and there is a lot of elements that can be taken up and for probably more focused understanding. And because of why we decided to have this kind of a broad panel in which we get an idea of how pandemic elections under pandemic are being held in the US, maybe, where it is a very systematic campaign, whereas in India, in the provincial election, where this is a more personalized campaign, and again in Brazil, where municipal elections are going to happen. But also before that, we have seen how digital mediums or digital mediums of WhatsApp and other technological platforms have been used to carry forward messages and also to build up narratives. So there are definitely some common elements which we will find the commonalities, but also the complexities of these all three different endeavors, but all three very important democracies, and how they are actually facing up and accepting the challenge and probably tiding over this challenge of whether not to delay democracy during a pandemic, or whether to maintain the democratic order, democratic exercise free and fairly in pandemic time. So that is something that I wanted to share in the beginning to set the context. And I would now like to invite Professor Landman to speak about the US elections, and then probably we'll take the panel further. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your invitation, and it's a pleasure to be speaking to you. I think our audience is mostly in India, so it's a great honor for me to be able to join you in India. I had a webinar earlier this season in India as well, and I very much enjoyed the audience and the interaction. I'm actually going to talk a little bit about the electoral cycle and the threat to the electoral cycle from the pandemic, and then contextualize that in the case of the United States. So I'll share my screen with you now. Just for some general points I wanted to raise, and then of course we can have Q&A after that. So we all agree that the elections themselves are a mainstay feature of democracy, and my own work on democracy over the years has focused not only on elections, electoral processes, but also the rights and freedoms that surround the fair conduct of genuine and transparent elections. So I'm very interested in the intersection between rights, liberties, freedoms, and democracy. So I'm just going to try to advance my slide here, which doesn't seem to be happening. One second, there we are. So I want to cover a little bit about the government response to the pandemic and how that really impinges on rights and freedoms and how that may affect the electoral cycle itself, as well as raise some of the risks and mitigations around the disruption of the electoral cycle from the pandemic. And then a little bit about campaigning under COVID, because we've had two different kind of experiences in the United States that are highly contrasting with one another. So if I begin, the government response itself, we've seen restrictions on freedom of movement. The social distancing measures, of course, make all sorts of interesting challenges for conduct of elections, restricted economic freedom, travel restrictions, local lockdowns, close of public transport, and COVID secure premises. So at our university, we took most of the summer to reopen 211 buildings in time for the academic year, but each building has to be COVID secure, which means it has internal dynamics, one-way systems, only so many people per office, washing and sanitation regimes, etc. And all these bring to bear a lot of challenges for the safe conduct of elections. Now, the Blavatnik School of Government at University of Oxford has created what they call the Coronavirus Government Response Tracker. And I would recommend to our listeners and viewers to really check this out. They have an array of about 17 different indicators that they then aggregate across different dimensions to show you what's happening in the world. So a time series plot of government response, or what they call the restriction index, shows that really the rise in restrictions has been very, very high as the pandemic has progressed. So from early March right through May, all the way up to September, we see these restrictions coming into play. And they vary tremendously by country. They vary tremendously within country. We here in the UK are experiencing a lot of local lockdowns now. Leicester in the Midlands had a local lockdown. Parts of the north east are now going through lockdown, bits of Scotland, etc. So it's very interesting, the sort of regional dynamics. Globally, the darker blue countries have more restrictions in place than the lighter countries. And again, this is all available from the Blavatnik School at Oxford University. I was very taken by this more systematic approach. I think that's about 180 countries in the data set. Everything's free to download and to analyze. Now, I've also been attracted by the ACE Electoral Knowledge Network idea of the electoral cycle. I think, when we hear about elections, we think, oh, it's just about turning up, voting, and then you figure out who wins. But actually, the cycle itself is highly complex. It's very planned. It has discrete phases and stages to it that are absolutely important to guarantee genuine and transparent elections. So there's planning and training and information and registration in the pre-electoral period. And then during the electoral period, you have the nominations, the campaigns, the votings, and the results. And then, of course, there's the post-electoral period where parties think about their strategies. What could be reformed? What could be done better? You know, could we review everything and see how we do the next time? And one of the promises of democracy, of course, is that if you lose an election, you have every possibility of winning the next one. And that keeps people kind of locked in and loyal to the idea of regular elections, the peaceful transfer of power. If you don't win this time, you have every chance of winning the next time. And the electoral cycle itself is then made up of planning the actual event and then review and reform. Now, each one of these stages in the electoral cycle can be affected by COVID. So depending on where you are in your schedule of elections, and the world has many, many elections at the local level, the national level, municipal level, the state, whatever different administrative unit, of course, is that there are hundreds of elections that have been planned and many of them disrupted. We noted that really through March, April, and May, a number of countries delayed elections, postponed elections, or canceled second stage of elections. In the United States, during the primary cycle, we saw that Wisconsin had an early primary in April the 7th, but 14 other states actually postponed their primary. So all sorts of different strategies. A colleague of mine from Malta, Luca de Generis Splendore, and I wrote this little piece in the Journal of Risk Research on pandemic democracy. And in that, we take the electoral cycle on the left-hand side of the table, the pre-electoral period and planning, the electoral period, and the post-electoral period, and we try to assess both the impact and likelihood of different risks. And you see that, there's limited potential for physical meetings. If you just think about the ability to have physical meetings, that will have a fairly low impact, but a very high likelihood of actually happening. Of course, we see that. So the opening images of people sitting around having a digital campaign, but I noticed that all the people were crowded around a laptop without masks and not social distancing. In our context, that can't happen. People can't have those types of meetings. So there has to be something else. And if you look down the list, limited physical campaigning and party conventions, all those sorts of things have come to bear through the electoral cycle as we've seen it unfold in particular in the United States. And so it's important that we think about how to mitigate against those things. What could actually be done? So what can we do online? What can we do with our digital platforms? What sort of virtual and remote working can we do? One of the lessons we've had from university life, of course, is that we would always talk about going online. Yes, we should do that someday. And the pandemic has forced us to go online very, very quickly. In a matter of weeks, we got everybody online, all of our modules online, our delivery methods online. And over the summer, we've been thinking about how do we blend some face-to-face with some online? What could we do in advance of the session, et cetera? And the learnings from that remote delivery of education very much cross over into learnings around remote running of elections and back and forth. So what about campaigning under COVID? Just to finish about a little bit about the context of the United States, notwithstanding what's happened over the past weekend, but what we've seen is that there were some physical events. I mean, Trump had a rally in Tulsa, inside closed, surroundings, which was, very much criticized. He then moved to outside physical events. Harrisburg International Airport, where I was born in Harrisburg. It's a very strong area for Trump supporters. And so he would turn up at a hangar with Air Force One. People would be outside and they would still have a physical event, because for someone like Trump, the rally is extremely important. It's a way of connecting directly with the people. And I think the rally is a form of almost a physical Twitter, if you will. He has millions of followers on Twitter. He likes to tweet out to his followers. The rally is a physical manifestation of that sort of rush that he gets off feeding off large events. We have also seen quite a few virtual events. So Biden was criticized early on in the campaign for hiding in his basement. But what he was doing was using what we're doing today by sitting within a safe surrounding, talking to his supporters, raising money, using the time to build his campaign base as the pandemic was raging. And he didn't want to have the physical events. We also see hybrid events. So the debates themselves, the debate last week was a mix of a physical presence of the two candidates and the moderator, all socially distanced, and then a very small audience that was socially distanced, and then of course, live broadcast, follow-up broadcast, etc. We often find in hybrid events that those that have logged on remotely are allowed to ask questions. Twitter followers are allowed to ask questions. It's a way of using the technology to engage with the candidates in a way that we haven't seen before. And then, of course, the digital strategies themselves, as already highlighted. So there's always traditional television ads, but social media platforms really have become extremely popular. And not only Facebook and Twitter, but other formats, et cetera. robocalls by using telephones programmed to phone people on their mobiles with a recorded message, for example. Email campaigns. I still get tons of email campaigns. And then the final one is a little less obvious to people, unless you are a recipient of the campaign, of course, is micro-targeting. So in the aftermath of the UK's vote to leave the European Union and the 2016 election, there was a lot of analysis on the use of micro-targeting and micro-data. And I kept thinking, but I didn't see any Trump commercials. That's because my profile on Facebook is non-amenable to being micro-targeted for a Trump campaign. So my purchasing habits, my cultural habits, what I like to watch, etc., was all filtered, and I wasn't seen as a likely a Trump voter or a likely Brexit voter. So therefore, I didn't get those ads. And yet, people who had the profile that was being matched to the microdata strategy would get those overwhelming communications from campaigns. And that's true of any other type of campaign. My profile might fit something that is more amenable to another kind of campaign, and then I would receive that information. I guess the final point I'd make in the observation here, certainly with respect to the United States, we've always said the United States is an expensive place to have an election. We think that the Trump campaign has probably burned through $1 billion, and I imagine that Biden is close to that as well. Biden raised $367 million in the month of August alone. And it's used for ad buys, it's used for commercials during football matches, like early on at the Super Bowl, for example. An ad will cost you $1 million for 30 seconds. And so it's a very, very expensive election, as well as a very, very dangerous election. The health risks are high, but the expenditure is absolutely huge. And most reports say that Trump started fundraising the day he took office, because he knew he absolutely had to keep on campaigning throughout his time as president. He had rallies during his presidency, and COVID has really compromised the ability for these live events. The DNC convention, the RNC convention were both compromised by COVID, and both were held virtually and produced online, much like this session today. So it absolutely radically transformed the way in which campaigns are run. The final point I'll make is that people don't stop communicating. So we just find alternative means to communicate. Campaigns have found alternative means of communicating, and we will have, I think, years of research and analysis on what changes really happened or what actually stayed the same. The messages are still getting out, voters are still voting, and we could talk about how one votes in one of these elections. And I guess my final point is that I did vote in the election for this year. I'm an absentee voter from the state of Virginia. There was a double authentication process where I had to send my details in. I then got a ballot sent by email, which I filled in and then posted it back to the state of Virginia. What I don't know is whether my vote got there and whether it'll be counted. That I can't verify, but there you are. So those are my thoughts that I wanted to share with you just for this session. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. And I think there will be many questions about the last point, also last couple of points that you mentioned about the legitimacy of the voting exercise of it all, right? Whether one narrative is actually delegitimizing any kind of postal or mail-in votes in that sense. So then what happens? And will people be forced to go out and vote despite the health risk that it possesses? And I think there are many questions around that topic perhaps. But what we'll do is we will go through all the other speakers also, and probably we'll take definitely we'll take all the questions at the end, right? And if you have any questions, please write them in the comments and write them to me. And you can direct your questions to me, and we will take some of the questions with the speakers towards the end of this panel. And I would now like to invite Dr. Qureshi, and we definitely, I think Professor Landman has mentioned the cost of elections also, and that is also one major aspect of concern in Indian elections always, about the cost of elections of the state in conducting the elections, but also the cost of elections of from the political parties and candidates. So we can probably also look into what Dr. Qureshi has to speak. Dr. Qureshi, please.
Just a little correction to the introduction which Maya made in the beginning. I was associated with Delhi University, the Cluster Information Center, Innovation Center in the Ashoka University, you may have heard of it. And there is a very interesting, unique department called TCPD, Trivedi Center for Political Data. I'm associated with that. I'm a distinguished fellow there. And there is a private university in Gurgaon called IILM. I'm the chancellor of that. And I would also like to mention I'm on the board of International IDEA, which was referred to a bit earlier. This is my 7th year on the board. And International IDEA was kind enough to appoint me as the Global Ambassador of Democracy, along with Mr. Kofi Annan, who unfortunately passed away. Of course, I continue to promote democracy in every possible way in this part of the world. So that is just filling in the gaps. Now, in my 10 minutes, I'm going to break my talk into two segments. One is international implication. The other is specific to India. International May had done an analysis worldwide of the implication of COVID on democracy. The threat of COVID to democracy is very, very serious. And we hear that in the name of democracy and in the name of pandemic and emergency, the heads of various governments who have an inherent tendency for authoritarianism, they will grab the opportunity, have more powers, be in a hurry to share. Exactly what happened. 68 countries postponed their elections or referenda. Countries assumed absolute powers, and I think Sarthak, you had mentioned Hungary, Serbia, Israel, Philippines, Chile, you name it, and there are countries who bypassed, restricted the powers of judiciary, and even in India, unfortunately, our Chief Justice came out with a which must have been music to the ears of the government, that in times of emergency, like this, the government should act in harmony. Now, acting in Supreme Court and executive, because even human rights and the role of the Supreme Court, the judiciary, and in fact, we are seeing this attitude virtually. Now, while about 70 countries postponed elections, 34 countries have held their election, which was actually our role model. In fact, Bihar, whether the Bihar elections will be held or all, as you know, by the end of November. And my answer from the beginning was that there is no question of Bihar election getting postponed, because postponing election is not provided in our constitution. There are, and when I come to India, I'll maybe talk about it. Among the 34 countries, the 3 role models, one was Taiwan, which held 2 elections, one in January, the other in March, and with excellent voter turnout and with great efficiency. South Korea was even a better model for us. It was a very large election, and they did a beautiful job. And both the record turnout, the highest ever turnout in the case of South Korea in 28 years. And I had written several articles on the subject, and partly in a lighter vein, I said that the reason for the higher turnout is that people were so tired of the lockdown, they needed an opportunity to go out, and what better legitimate legal opportunity to go out and vote. So that's why they came out in a very large number enthusiastically, despite the risk. Of course, the precautions were all these governments, very standard precautions, of course, face mask and social distancing, the hand sanitizer, and what have you. Now, we were also watching very closely Sri Lankan election, which happened on the 5th of last month. Initially, they were postponed, but finally they were held very successfully. Now, in India, there were several elections, and by elections in India, all kinds of elections keep happening year on. Initially, some elections were postponed. Election to the upper house of parliament, then there were by states which were all postponed. Then there are upper houses in some of the state, they were postponed. But later on, Rajya Sabha, which is the upper house elections, were conducted. And now Bihar elections, which Sarthak mentioned, has 70 million voter list. So they have been announced for October and November. And all the pending 60, 70 by-elections will also be held along with Bihar. So now, what are the guidelines? Election Commission has come with a detailed guidelines, and they had been observing all the countries. In fact, currently this year in India Election Commission is the chairman of AWEB, Association of a World Election Body. So they organized a global conference on sharing experience on COVID, and of course they learned something from there, and they must have imparted some knowledge to the others. Some of the things which they have done to avoid crowding, the number of polling stations has been increased from nearly 60,000 to about 100,000. The maximum size of voters in every polling station, which used to be 1,500, has been reduced to 1,000. And of course, people are being encouraged to come at a staggered time.
I think we know that there are the limitations of technology to these exercises. But thank you for putting these interesting points, and also many of the very important ideas of the conducting, like as you would know from your experience also, and the technicalities of voting process, and the technicalities of the EVM and the making. Like I think this also leads into the idea of from where Professor Landman said about making the premises COVID secure, and making these polling booths COVID secure is very important, I think, in terms of conducting a safe conduct. But let's also move on, and we will now. I would like to now invite Professor Khan, who has recently released this very nice book called The Game of Votes, and that talks about digital communication and virtual campaigning in Indian elections. And Professor Khan will probably also lend his insights into this idea of virtual campaigning and during this COVID time. And then we will have move forward to Professor Leticia Cesarino, right? So Professor Khan, if you can.
Yeah, hi everyone. Yeah. Nice to hear from Qureshi Saab. Nice, understanding of how elections are should be done and how it's doing. I'm really happy that I can hear Professor Todd. I have heard, I heard about him. I also read some of his article. Nice to see him articulating nicely on certain areas which are quite dear to my heart. Now, what I've done there, I know that there might be a problem of, low bandwidth and my voice may not be audible. So what I've done, unlike any presentation, I have put a lot of, text on the presentation and they all appear together. And so this is what you have to, I probably would be, save time, I'll be I'll start my presentation and do this so that we save time. So now we are, it's a really good occasion to talk about this because it's very timely and pandemic. The first time we are having election both in the US and this place. So now the COVID has seen suspension of liberties across the world, and for free and fair elections are a foundation. But we have to understand that we have to take a lot of precaution on curtailing the spread of disease. Then so both need to be balanced, and this is what probably Election Commission is trying to do, that we should have election and we should do some kind of balancing act. And we know that on 28th and 7th November, we are going to have elections. And but there are two challenges. And the challenges are that the candidates have to reach out to voters despite those restrictions which are in place. So, so he has to do change from words to pins, pokes, likes, faves, RTs, shares, hashtags, algos, and memes. So this is what the shift need to be on the voter side. Uh, uh, why it's required that, as Qureshi Saab was also hinting upon this, in India, there's a tradition that you have to go to the person's house with folded hand and a large gathering of people to tell that you are actually very popular. Now, in this case, only 5 people would go. The second problem is that in India, the road shows are very important, and there are miles and miles of cars which form road shows. Now, probably the trend started probably by Advani when he took out the Rath Yatra, and that tradition has become very integral part of election campaigning. Now, here also there would be only 5 cars, and there would be a gap of half an hour, and I don't know how many people would be looking at those road shows and what would happen. So this is another problem of conveying, which was very traditional, but it would have to be modified, as I told you, that need to modify it looking at the risk which is involved. Now, what has changed? Change is that the people showed up in rallies, they showed cadre strength, their arrangement, size of ground, and how you articulate, how you talk to audience become important. You can see Prime Minister Modi addressing a rally in a way which is his characteristic, pointing, gestures, and which appear very confident. And you can see lakhs of people attending his rally, and there is a give and take, a lot of his and you can on the other, they're all walls are plastered with colorful posters. There are leaflets. There are in market. There are festivity. People talk, move around. So Indian election are like big festival, unlike any other country. Here, the social, contacts start become bigger. People come, people talk, and then they would go and visit markets where there would be another set of campaign put up offline. So, but this is all going to change uh, to a different thing. Now, pandemic has actually pushed campaign further to digital and visual and online media. Now, as you know that the with people who don't have much money would be fighting still on social media platforms. But now the social media platform are not taken as authentic. So, or to develop trust and to develop that trust which is required to convert visibility to vote, you require to do something else. And for that, there are two medium, and the one major one is television as broadcasting medium. I see lot of conversing would happen on television uh, to develop trust, which I'll be talking about a little later. Uh, there's another thing. You can see the Doordarshan, which is Indian national television in India, logo on those 4 slides. Here, Prime Minister was coming regularly on TV, and during COVID, he was sometime pleading, sometime making a point, somebody is instructing, and in the last slide, he is appearing as if as a an elder in the house and trying to give you some advice. Now, during these elections, he did a very different during these pandemic, when he was trying to calm down people. He did a thing which is a little different. What he did that like cult leaders, he started asking them to make noise with thalis or ring bells. On another broadcast, he said, okay, shut down the light and put diyas and torch lights or cell phone lights. So those little mind people followed those, and these are those little things which let you build that kind of a reflex that whatever is told on television. Uh, so the another problem of using television as a medium becomes that it is which election commission has received, that it is advantage incumbent because they own that space. They have a lot of budget to give advertisement and all. So we have to be look deeper into it and understand. But the according to me, last two elections we saw the social media rising in India, 14 and 19. But this time Bihar election would see a lot of media on television. Now, what the voter should be doing, would be doing actually would be that the campaign would be, they would be trying to, ape those creators who have large following. But what happens there is that the social media attention is measured only through likes, click, and followers. But now, how many votes you would get? How would you convert them into voting you? So that is something which is require some kind of trust building, not how much you are visible. So here you can see that of course the social media is quite cheap. Everybody can handle. We can and uh, but uh, but the problem with the social media is fake news. The fake news is not a is a problem, but a bigger problem in the sense that uh, propaganda machinery tend to use it. There are bots, fake accounts, and everything. Now, in Mumbai, we have seen that, and they have lot of started putting a lot of celebrity fake account profiles and to influence to market influencing and all. So I don't want to see that happening here. And for that we have to do something. Uh, on the other side, we can see Trump, as we Todd mentioned about him, but this time his tweet is put as fact check. The Facebook has completely deleted it. Twitter has put a label which is fact check. And so the pandemic actually opens a Pandora box. All the countries are seeing rise of hyper nationalism. More focus is on self-reliance, enhancing domestic production. Anti-China sentiment is building in a lot of countries. There's reverse migration happening in India. The people want to go back to the villages and all and want to work. There are some of them are returning, but that is a very small portion which is happening. There is an increased cycle during pandemic. There was increased reliance on negative news cycles. And the campaign actually is shifting towards, which is based on fear. As a communication expert, I can tell you that these have been the building block of certain famous campaigns. Uh, I would like you to see one. Matlab, these are all very old things. So that is what I wish you to see a 1 minute ad of Johnson in President Johnson in 1964. Now, this is just 1 minute, so I think I take the liberty to show this to you.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. These are the stakes to make a world in which all of God's children can live, or to go into the dark. We must either love each other or we must die.
Vote for President Johnson on November 3rd. The stakes are too high for you to stay home.
So this was it. NBC, they only paid for one channel, one slot, which was NBC. It was soon pulled out, lot of anger, and everything is started with this campaign. But what happened, this was first negative, aggressive television campaign ever. It started lot of debate on all rest of the channel. And that made this, his campaign, becoming very popular. It thrived on fear of those things that nuclear war would happen, the other one. And that's an old thing, but that is what is, again, we need to understand these. The other thing very quickly, I wanted to that political marketing is a established thing in world over. And India, in India also its roots are much older. Probably Rajiv Gandhi started to give a small portion of campaign to rediffusion or those companies. And now this is, BJP is now, quite ahead on all this. They were the first to come up with a IT cell, come up with an app. And but this time, because the visual would be doing duty of actually meeting the candidates, which need to be a more visual, and that is what I thought I should share. And we all know that if I show you certain visual, and these visuals can be recycled easily for the other propaganda machinery. So they have 90% if people understand, and it's easy to assimilate them. Recall is higher. It's quite you can. Then the impact is also, a lot of studies measured that the impact, if we say visually something, the impact is quite high. And then if we adapt this to the need of voter, in the sense that what they want, if we present it, that is going to be the second campaign principle. Now, you can see that Amit Shah, the BJP president, is doing a rally, and all the worker are they are seeing it streamed on them. BJP has appointed lot of page promotes, those people who are manage a page which is limited to small mohallas or small localities. There they would be managing WhatsApp groups. So the cadre to look after the digital is actually quite strengthened there. So there's this second advantage they would be having. The another thing which is there's a larger model, so but I'm showing you the smaller model, that you need to have greater visibility, greater interest, and greater focus, even if you show the visuals. This is taken from 2014 election analysis, and which converts to better retention, higher engagement, deeper association. And that is what helped them, they focused on one person more. So, and so these are the takeaway, or these are the things which are now quite important for people. The second thing which I was trying to tell you was the trust. The digital campaigning can bring you, a lot of likes or something, but trust is something where you would take the vote. And so the PR company Edelman Trust Barometer, each year they take out and identify one area where trust is what is important for them to trust. This year is about competence and it is about ethics. There are two things this year. And why these two things? As a communication expert, I can tell you that this is kind of a crisis communication. If there is a house on fire or something, you require somebody who who would be able to contain, control, and lot of, and ethical, so that he is not hiding anything, and several, he has to, fill the void by giving you a lot of information. All. So the same principle is going to apply for fighting this election, that you have to be fighting for the trust and you have to appear for as competent and ethics. You can see that Bihar recently had a famous actor died, and there was a lot of fervor around him, and they was talking about Bihar Smita, but soon they realized that this would not work. People have started saying Nitish Kumar as somebody who couldn't contain pandemic. People who went from UP were better treated when they reached Bihar. They were not, and he is now named as Dushasan Babu. Like earlier, he was like a good governance. Now he's named as bad governance. So that is what pandemic sometime would do. Is that they would be looking at people who are more competent and not the Bihar Smita or something. It would be another thing is that word over politicians thrive on their campaign run on the popular, on the fear. Social media has a tendency to quickly amplify this fear, spread fake news, and if the Johnson's campaign was run this year, the people would have taken shots and still pictures out of it and annotated it and wrote comments, and it would have circulated like anything, much more effective. As an academician, what we all can do is to that we have access to data, we can have facts, we can understand what how quickly we can check and make places where we can check these. And so the media literacy, digital literacy, and all this need to be put in voter to have fair election. We don't want them to get swayed by those things. And so here I would end with thanking you. And this is the book. Most of thing which I talked was from the book, and it looked very, very important nowadays, in the sense that now the digital the next elections would be all digital, and how to do this. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. I'm here. Would be very, very interesting to listen to Leticia, Professor Leticia, and nice. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And this was really very insightful, and drawing from these very important and points that we sometimes, overlook in the idea of, or in the scope of grand theorization of voting behavior and other studies. So thank you so much. I think the trust factor is very important, and we will have to explore more how that unravels in the digital space. And I would now like to invite Professor Leticia, who has been patiently waiting all along for her chance. And let's go from Bihar to Brazil now, and shift our gaze a little bit. And Professor Leticia, over to you. You have to unmute yourself.
Sure. I start that. Thanks. Good evening, everyone. Here in Brazil, it's still morning time. So unfortunately, my internet connection is a bit unstable. So if it gets really bad, let me know and I can try and switch the phone, okay? So I prepared small text, so I'll stay within the 12 minutes, okay? So I'd like to begin by thanking Sarthak for the kind invitation to be sharing this panel with such distinguished colleagues. I'm very pleased and honored to be here, even if only virtually, to talk about elections in Brazil. So 5 weeks from now, on the 15th of November, we're going to be choosing mayors and city councilors in all Brazilian municipalities, both large and small. And this year, it will be very hard to predict exactly how campaigns and voting are going to turn out. Due to the pandemic, the electoral calendar was postponed in a few weeks, and some procedures on election day were also altered in order to minimize the risk of infection. Biometric identification was lifted and masks will be mandatory. The polls will be open for longer and there will be special voting times for elders. This is poised to be a very unique election cycle for more than one reason. So the pandemic context in Brazil is bad enough. By now, almost 150,000 people have reportedly died of COVID-19 in the country. The actual number of deaths might be even higher. GDP plummeted almost 10% in the past trimester, and over 60 million Brazilians are currently receiving emergency payments from the federal government in order to make up for rampant unemployment and insolvency. The health and economic crisis is not likely to go away anytime soon. But even before the pandemic, there were expectations about this year's elections because the last ones in 2018 were such a huge break with the normality of electoral politics in Brazil. In the past 2 years, myself and others have investigated and reflected on the possible extent of such rupture. My research in the field of digital anthropology looked more closely into what the digitalization of politics has meant for voter persuasion strategies, both official and unofficial, and also for patterns of voter choice and behavior. Both have changed significantly in 2018. Our current president's campaign was indeed unprecedented and caught many off guard. He didn't have nearly as much official media time as his main adversaries, but he made it clear that in the era of smartphones and social media, time on legacy media is no longer essential for winning an election. Bolsonaro did get a lot of TV time in the news in the aftermath of a knife attack that nearly killed him. But that visibility gained electoral traction and form through an online ecosystem where anti-establishment narratives were quietly spread to people's private messaging apps and social media newsfeed. His campaign succeeded precisely by turning what were regarded until then as political liabilities into assets and vices into virtues. Even after recovering from the knife attack, Bolsonaro stopped attending debates on TV and other conventional forms of electoral campaigning. A sprawling digital body of followers did most of the work on his behalf. Since then, many researchers and investigative reporters have dug deeper into what seems to have been a carefully crafted online communication strategy that effectively tapped on what digital media already had to offer on the way of persuading users to go for a radical break with the country's political establishment. The deployment of WhatsApp was particularly key and quite remarkable. Because of zero rating policies, WhatsApp is the most widespread and capillary app in Brazil. And for many Brazilians, this app is the internet. Peer-to-peer cryptography made sure that an intricate network assembled around large public groups set for bulk messaging pro-Bolsonaro and anti-establishment content every day during the campaign went unnoticed until very close to the polls. Noticed by the open public sphere, there is. In that ecosystem, which branched out onto Facebook, YouTube, and monetized alternative media sites, It was virtually impossible to discern authentic from inauthentic, original from fake content and profiles. Through algorithmic segmentation, these media also afforded unprecedented polarization. A split between two realities was created around Bolsonaro and the new right on the one side, and around the Workers' Party candidate on the other. These digitally mediated realities did not touch each other, except as inverted mirrors of one another. And binary antagonism escalated fast in a very tense campaign, especially online, but also on the streets. It seemed like supporters from both sides were in an ultimate holy battle for the country's destiny. Due to this precedent and to the fact that this year candidates are relying more on social media than they probably would because of the pandemic, there's been great concern with disinformation. Fake or distorted content about COVID-19 has been widespread on the internet from day one of the pandemic, often mimicking themes and narratives coming from the US. Hydroxychloroquine, zinc, Chinese virus, 5G, George Soros, Bill Gates, the usual themes. And for the past few days, conspiratorial QAnon-related content is becoming more common. Online disinformation creates an atmosphere of confusion and epistemic ambiguity, which makes it impossible to stabilize evidence-based causalities and responsibilities for the local effects of the pandemic. Many in Brazil seem just resigned about it. The official campaign season barely started a few days ago, so it's early to say if and to which extent will the online disinformation ecosystem already in place influence voter choice and behavior. For the past 2 years, legal and political authorities in Brazil have struggled with the problem of fake news and mimetic warfare in politics, health, and other areas. Since last year, Congress has been conducting an investigation on invisible influence operations during the 2018 elections. It's also currently debating a comprehensive piece of legislation on this issue, an Internet Freedom, Responsibility, and Transparency Bill. Electoral justice has instituted new norms, such as banning fake profiles, bulk messaging on WhatsApp, and other kinds of inauthentic online behavior. This week, it partnered up with Facebook in order to try and curb disinformation and encourage official news on the company's platforms. It is unlikely, however, that such efforts will yield any significant effect on the spread of disinformation in the short term. On the other hand, it also seems unlikely that this year, voters will get involved as passionately and viscerally in canvassing for particular candidates. Most analysts are projecting that the pandemic context will encourage continuity, and thus benefiting those candidates and political groups who are already in power. Moreover, local elections tend to have a very different character than national ones. Most Brazilian municipalities are not very large, so voters are closer to candidates and more likely to be mostly concerned with concrete issues affecting daily life in their communities and towns, rather than with the kind of remote ideological battles that usually go viral online. The president himself does not seem very interested in getting involved in local disputes. He isn't even affiliated with any existing party right now. His eyes are already on re-election 2 years from now. So despite all pandemic-related challenges, it is likely that this year's municipal elections will actually go way smoother than 2018. It will be a calm before the 2022 storm. Thank you.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. Did you say thank you? I'm sorry.
I'm open. Sure. I'm open for questions about details.
Maybe I heard thank you.
There was an overview.
Great. Thank you. So, Leticia, thank you so much, and thank you all the panelists for these very insightful, presentations. And despite the technical difficulties that we had in some of them, but thank you so much. I would begin by probably asking a question from the, order in which we are getting. And I think we got the question for Letitia, which I will just share with you. And I also had, as a moderator, I'll take a liberty of asking my own question, one of my own questions also to Letitia, which interests me and some other scholars also here, I think, or who work on informal politics. And I think in the immediate year of the pandemic, also initial few days of the pandemic, we saw these informal networks also being very active on the ground in giving relief and support work in terms of, in the favelas, right? And in Sao Paulo and in Brasilia and other places. Like, what role do you think does informal politics plays in rather whether in aiding or mitigating the pandemic, but also in probably keeping politics alive during the pandemic? And did you, through your research or in the election campaigns that you have seen, probably happen to encounter these kind of things or look into these kind of things in Brazilian politics? And the second question, which has come from an audience member, is Natalia is asking that as Cesarino has said, in Brazil, Facebook is the internet for most of the smartphone users. And recently, I've read about it in India also. If any of you could talk a little bit about how, if at all, it's being dealt with. Thanks. Oh, okay. So this is basically for the India panelist and not for Brazil as such, I think. So maybe we'll redirect it to the Indians. But Letitia, if you could just answer my question on informal politics then, and how they can be used in the campaigning.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so Brazilian regulations in election years are very strict. So candidates are not supposed to be campaigning right before the actual season. So the season barely started. It started on the 26th, so around 1 week ago. So it's early to say how the kind of informal bottom-up movements, especially the ones built around the pandemic. And you're right that a lot happened in terms of grassroots, informal networks of support during the pandemic, because the truth is both federal and state and even city level governments didn't do much. There was no unified, articulated plan to fight the pandemic in Brazil. And I think to a large extent that was on purpose. So it got really fragmented. So it is likely that, I don't have data on that, but it is likely that those networks that were constructed are gonna be deployed to do what is the lack of big rallies and larger, right? Rallies are gonna lack because they won't be allowed this year. So it's an interesting development to watch out for. One thing that I noticed is that politics during the pandemic ended up producing a lot of new candidates for the city council. Some figures that got prominent in doing politics during the pandemic because of the pandemic also went out now to be candidates in both big and smaller cities, which had really different dynamics. I'm actually more interested in smaller rural area. I've been looking more into that, but the kind of development that you identified in Rio, São Paulo, and the big cities are likely to be important, because it will be either that informal door-to-door campaigning, community level campaigning, or social media. There won't be a lot of options besides that.
Okay. Thank you so much. I think we have a couple of questions which can be directed to Dr.
I think I would like to reply to the Facebook
yes.
thing, and
Yes.
that or do you want?
No, please, if you can reply to the Facebook thing. Yeah.
This is the Facebook actually is facing problems, and rightly so. Now there is a data protection bill which is coming, and they have to do their act right. People are trying to avoid a lot of those things, and confusing it with uh, free speech, and confusing it with other things. But what I want to tell all panelists as well is that if it is like fire, if they start, if a lie can't be an opinion of anybody, and that is one principle on which all media operates. So we don't take that, we can't take lie as an opinion. And you can't and so lot of places we are going to set right, in at least in India, the problem which is majorly with all players, but it has now cropped up with the Facebook, and so that is what I wanted to at that point of time say this.
Right, right. Thank you so much, and I think that's a very important point. I would just like to mention that we have about 10 more minutes to go for the questions, and I'll just put two questions across which have come, which I can put them across to Dr. Qureshi, if you're there, right? Yeah. So Dr. Qureshi, this first question has come from Vad Berenskor, and Vad is asking that somehow so he's asking that. What would the character of vote buying be in the upcoming elections in Bihar? And would COVID discourage the practice of vote buying or handing out cash? Or will it just change the way that it is organized? And a lot of it happens clandestinely and during the election campaign, So, Dr. Qureshi, and I think in your book also you had mentioned about 40 odd ways of vote buying in the book Undocumented Wonder, right? So what do you think will happen to the practice of vote buying during the COVID-19 pandemic? That is one question, and the other question has been asked by Avinash, and he's asking that um, what if these kind of 3D rallies which were used in Gujarat by Narendra Modi can be used in Bihar, and what will be the cost probably of these kind of 3D rallies, and will they be also covered under the restrictions of campaigning uh, put in place due to the pandemic? So these two questions, Dr. Qureshi.
And there is always a cat and mouse game happening between us and the voters. Obviously,
Yeah, Dr. Qureshi, I think we are not able to hear you very clearly. I would actually pass that question about the 3D rallies, and I think to Professor Khan, and if you can answer, like, what are the optics and what are the meanings and what are probably the successes of this kind of 3D rallying, because something that we recently also I saw in Indonesia, that the Indonesian election campaign are also, candidates are using these kind of 3D images, hologram images, which have been, already practiced and used in the Indian context. So do you think that evolution of a technology in that case is becoming common?
Thank you. You are, we are, right and wrong both on this, in the sense that these have been used by Narendra Modi in the earlier elections. It is a lot, those places which are far flung, and those places which are where actual voter comes from, are, you can't put them there. They are usually have to be put in metropolitan cities where there's a lot of infrastructure. So a lot of vote doesn't come from those places where these holograms are shown. But this is a good spectacle, the good starting point to gather people's attention, to have eyeballs, as we call them, and this is a good gimmick, and that lets you interact with the other thing, that also conveys, those new smarter techniques convey to the voter that you are with the technology, you are an evolved party, you have means to do this. Look at the, of course, that kind of money nobody has. The election in India are most expensive. It's $8 billion dollar election. Last election was about 8 million, and more than half of it was spent by Bharatiya Janata Party. And they have the, the money, they have power is, can't be matched by other things. So the moment you start looking at those gizmos, in my presentation, I just want to go back to roots, try to win trust, not to, try to get those things which you can't actually do. You can't have means, you don't have money. You would rather spend it on other pamphlets or leaflets, because most of the parties don't have that kind of money. And like $4 billion, I don't think who can spend or who can't. So that is my answer, that these are, we should just watch them, nice, get entertained, but nobody would get swayed by the except for some, until unless you have those little WhatsApp group which would take, a photograph of a hologram and annotate this, then only something was going to happen in India. So this is my take on this.
Thank you. Thank you. And I believe there was a question on fake news, but I think Professor Khan has partially answered that when he's about the Facebook point, and also in the point that a lie cannot be an opinion, or so there has to be self-regulation, but there has to be some policy regulations. And I think it's going to be a mix of both things, which will probably be used to tackle such kind of, regulate the fake news market. And similarly, there's also the question of bots or artificial followers, which can be bought by political parties and agencies. And I see advertisements of agencies which are giving services of bulk messaging and everything. So it's a market also for all these kind of forces in the election campaign, which has grown. But I would like to ask, turn to Professor Patrick French for the last question of the evening, and then we will close with that after that last question is answered. Right.
Great, thank you very much, Sartak. Thank you everybody for putting up with some technical issues along the way, and particularly to Professor Landerman, who in fact just had to leave in order to go into another meeting. So I had a question which is, I think, really for Professor Cesarino. It seems that there's a sort of attitude to, you could call it biological safety around the pandemic, of which both Presidents Trump and Bolsonaro seem to represent, the idea that wearing a mask is a kind of imposition on your freedom. It's really quite an extreme idea of negative liberty, which in much of the rest of the world, in Asia, East Asia, South Asia, is really not a subject of particular contention. And I wondered if you could just speculate a little on why it is that political leaders in certain countries with a certain history seem to regard this issue of negative liberty around the wearing of a mask. I mean, I'm using that in a way as a symbol of something larger. Why that seems to be so central to the political and also the popular debate. It's very much a sort of groundswell of opinion in certain nations that your freedom is severely damaged if the government asks you to protect yourself and others through the wearing of a mask.
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting question, because the mask was supposed to be just a technical, right, scientific guideline, but it ended up in certain countries becoming almost like a tag for opposing right parties or something like that. So it did happen here, but I think in a much lesser extent than in the US. In the US, it's really very impressive how individuals there have this, they're much more suspicious of government intervention in their lives, I guess. So it did happen in Brazil, and actually a lot of what Bolsonaro supporters, the narratives that get to them about the pandemic, a lot of them are literally copied from Trump, and right, but sometimes even within hours, Bolsonaro or his sons or somebody is just repeating whatever Trump just tweeted. So, right, it's really direct sometimes, or just a translation of the same slogans. But here in Brazil, I think the effect is similar, but the historical reasons are a bit different, because I think here it comes out of a sense that among the popular classes that the state never really cared much for them. You know what I mean? So I've seen an interesting commentary on the American case, which is that healthcare system there, right, which is all privatized and doesn't do a lot for them either. So now, after all these years, all of a sudden, the government is telling them to do something about their health when they were not there for them before that. And here, I think it's the same kind of a feeling, but more generalized, right, in areas of favelas and you know, people getting the message from state governors and mayors that they just should stay home and not work. And most of these people need to go out and work so they can survive. So until this system of direct payments was instituted in April, people were very skeptical about these technical guidelines for social isolation and all that, because, and Bolsonaro played with that a lot in the sense that he corroborated this kind of feeling, right? Very negationist narratives on the pandemic, but always maintaining an optimal level of ambiguity. So he wouldn't be held responsible for the deaths either. So Trump has this similar style of keeping disinformation high and ambiguity high, which doesn't allow any kind of blame to be fixed on them. So throwing out the blame to the governors and to China or to the WHO, and a very similar style. So I think that's, yeah, it's similar facts, but with different historical, different hold on each country's history, I guess, of suspicion of the state for different reasons.
Right. Right. Thank you. Thank you so much. And with that, I think I would like to put an end to this fascinating evening discussion, morning also in some cases like Letitia's. And I'm really thankful to all the participants and all the audience members who have joined us today for this very wonderful discussion. And I'm also really thankful for all the questions that have come in, and we have tried to answer almost all of them. And despite the technical difficulties, I'm really happy that we are constantly having new and new and more interested and deeply interested audiences coming into the seminar series, like seminar and lecture series events every week that we have been organizing now. And the audiences and the questions and the participation kind of also gives us strength, the School of Arts and Sciences, to get more such distinguished and more such diverse panel, so that we can ask important questions and explore more, critically understand these kind of important questions of the times that we are living in. And these are definitely interesting times to live in and to do social sciences, right, as all of you would agree. And thank you so much. Thank you for this fascinating discussion. And we will be putting up the video for this on the YouTube channel of the Ahmedabad University for further dissemination for those who might have missed it. So that will be also put in soon. And we would also be asking you to stay tuned to the Ahmedabad University social media handles to watch out for the announcement for the further events of the seminar and lecture series. And we are having another very interesting webinar also next week. In fact, what are the classics? And please look out for the Ahmedabad University social media handles to get more information on the upcoming events. Thank you all of you.
Thank you, Sarthak. I can't thank you enough. Patrick, you have been very, very nice, and one of the very good hosts. Maya, I can't thank her enough, being such a nice, wonderful. I've been to so many, but it has been so nicely conducted by Sarthak and Maya and Patrick. I'm really appreciate kind of.
Thank you, Professor Khan. And I think also special thanks goes to Professor Letitia also, because I think she did reschedule her class for this panel discussion. So I'm really thankful to you, as well as to all of your students who also very graciously and generously agreed to attend the seminar. So that was a very nice gesture on your part. And we look forward to engaging with you more. right? Thank you.
Yes, me too. It was really a pleasure talking to you. I saw a couple of my students in the room.
Yes.
So I'll say hi to them as well. And Maya, Patrick, thanks so much. Dr. Ken, it was great to learn about your book. I'll certainly be looking into that. So thanks a lot.